Nora Callahan was standing in her kitchen on an unremarkable afternoon in coastal Maine, the kind of day that usually slipped by without leaving a mark. Thin winter sunlight poured through the window above the sink, and dust drifted lazily in the beams, turning the air into something almost visible. The radiator clicked now and then. Somewhere deeper in the house, the clock kept time with a steady, patient tick. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? She had a wooden spoon in her hand, stirring a pot of soup she'd started on autopilot, more habit than hunger. Carrot, celery broth, comfort assembled from muscle memory. She was halfway between thinking about nothing and thinking about everything when she felt it. A strange shift. Not a gust from a door opening. Not a sound. Just a subtle change in the atmosphere, as if the room itself had leaned forward to listen. In the doorway, her son paused. Micah stood there with a backpack slung over one shoulder, jacket slightly rumpled, cheeks pink from the cold. He looked like he always did after school, tall, lanky, moving fast even when he stopped. 17. That age where the body is rushing toward adulthood, but the face still carries the boy who once asked for bedtime stories and believed in monsters under the bed. Except today, he wasn't rushing. He hesitated, as if a sentence had risen in his throat and stalled. His hand tightened around the strap of his bag, and then he lifted his eyes and locked them on hers. Nora's chest tightened so quickly she almost mistook it for a cough. It wasn't the usual glance a mother gets from a teenage son, half attentive, already turning toward his room, his phone, his friends, his own private orbit. This was steady, deep, a gaze that didn't skim across her but settled, as if he were measuring her, taking in the parts of her she'd grown used to hiding in plain sight. Not just Mom, all of her. The exhaustion she wore like an undershirt, the strength she never named, the laughter she rationed, the quiet sorrow she carried the way some people carry their wallets, always there, always tucked close. Nora froze mid-step. The spoon hovered over the pot. The soup bubbled softly, as if it didn't know anything extraordinary had happened. Micah's face, still soft in places, still boyish around the mouth, seemed different today, sharper, more deliberate. His jaw was set as if he was holding back words or holding in a realization. The expression wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was awareness. Nora's thoughts rushed like water breaking through a dam. She had been carrying so much for so long that she rarely felt the weight until something shifted and reminded her. Years of raising Micah alone after her husband's death. The quiet grief that didn't always scream but never fully left. The endless tasks that formed the scaffolding of their lives: groceries, school forms, repairs, dishes, laundry, permission slips, dentist appointments, broken buttons, late fees, early mornings. Small victories stacked on top of constant tiredness, and she realized with a strange sting that she rarely paused to see herself reflected in someone else's eyes. Friends asked polite questions. Neighbors commented on weather. Coworkers joked about deadlines. Everyone saw responsible Nora, single mom Nora, capable Nora. But no one looked at her like Micah was looking at her now, like he could see every layer and wasn't turning away. It made her feel exposed, and unexpectedly, acknowledged. She noticed him too, in a way she hadn't in the rush of daily life. The way his shoulders had broadened, the way his voice had lowered over the last year, changing like a radio station drifting out of tune, and then finding a new frequency. The way he carried an awareness of life's hardness, even when he didn't talk about it. He was stepping into a world she could no longer fully protect him from. That realization brought pride so fierce it hurt, and a pang of longing she didn't have a clean name for. Longing for time, longing for the boy he used to be, longing for a future where she could stop bracing for impact. Nora swallowed. She could have filled the silence with routine homework. How was school? Do you want soup? The safe questions that kept the day moving. But something inside her told her to stay quiet, to let the moment stretch, because it felt fragile, like a thin thread being woven between them. A bridge. Micah didn't move. His eyes didn't slide away. He looked at her as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. And Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not embarrassment, but the intensity of being witnessed. It made her think of all the small moments she'd overlooked: the glances across a dinner table, the quick smiles when a joke landed, the subtle nods in passing. She had always assumed those were just life, ordinary, forgettable. Now she realized they were evidence of something larger. A relationship quietly building depth while she was busy surviving. She remembered the early years after her husband, Evan, died. The nights when she had held Micah close on the couch, his small body heavy with sleep, and whispered promises she didn't know if she could keep. The mornings when she'd put on a brave face because Micah needed breakfast more than he needed the truth that she felt like she might collapse. The private bargain she'd made, as long as he is safe and okay, my needs don't matter. Standing here now, she realized Micah had absorbed more than she'd ever admitted. He had watched her keep going. He had watched her choose stability again and again. He had watched her grief and her effort and her small moments of joy. And now he was old enough to understand what that meant. Old enough to see her not only as his mother, but as a person, a woman who had lived, loved, lost, and endured. The kitchen felt warmer. The sunlight seemed brighter. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Micah shifted his weight slightly, backpack still hanging from his shoulder. And Nora held her breath as if a single movement might shatter the intimacy. His expression softened just a fraction, and he gave a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, like he was confirming to himself that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the hall toward the living room. His footsteps were measured, not hurried, the way a person walks when they're carrying something new inside them. Nora stood there with the spoon still in her hand, heart racing, as though being seen had given her a kind of courage she didn't know she possessed. The spoon slipped from her fingers and clinked lightly against the counter. She flinched at the sound, then let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the living room, Micah paused by the old bookshelf, two sagging shelves lined with paperbacks, cookbooks, and hardcovers that had followed Nora through apartments, through moves, through seasons of her life. He ran his finger along the spines as if reading them with his touch. He used to ignore that shelf. It had been background. Now he stopped at a worn novel Nora had loved in college, its cover softened from years of rereading. He pulled it free and looked at it for a long moment, like he could feel the history in it. Nora watched from the doorway, something tender and unsettled stirring inside her. Micah sat on the couch, still in his jacket, and fiddled with the zipper. He glanced at her now and then, seriousness in his eyes that didn't belong to the boy who used to beg for more screen time. Nora finally stepped into the room, unsure what she was supposed to do with her hands, unsure what version of herself she was supposed to be. She had learned to be strong. She had learned to be steady. She hadn't practiced being seen. Micah lifted the book slightly. "Did you like these?" he asked, voice quiet. Nora blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question and the depth underneath it. "I did," she said. Her voice sounded softer than she expected. "I used to read constantly, like I couldn't get enough." Micah nodded, eyes drifting to the page edges. What kind of stories? Nora could have answered with titles. She could have kept it shallow. Instead, she felt something inside her loosen. She told him about the kinds of books she loved, ones where the main character left home and discovered who they were, ones about small towns and big secrets, ones with people who were flawed but trying. She spoke the way she hadn't spoken in a long time, not in bullet points but in memories. Micah listened without interrupting, no impatient sighs, no phone in his hand, just attention. Nora's chest warmed. She told him about being 15 and dreaming of traveling, about wanting to study literature, about the friend she used to share playlists with, about her first job at a cafe where she felt grown up because she could steam milk and spell complicated drink orders. Micah's eyes flicked to her face as if he was collecting the pieces of her she'd never offered before. He asked questions, not too many, not intrusive, but curious in a way that felt respectful. Each question was like a small hand reaching across a distance that had existed between them without either of them naming it. Nora noticed the tension in his shoulders ease as she spoke, as if hearing her story gave him something he didn't know he was missing. It struck her then their relationship was changing, evolving, becoming more mutual. Not just parent and child, but two people learning to see each other. It was beautiful. It was unsettling. Because it reminded her that he was becoming independent. That he was forming his own perspective, that she could no longer define the boundaries of their connection the way she once had. And yet she felt relief too. Relief that he could see her complexity and not be frightened by it. Relief that he could recognize her struggle and still feel safe. Relief that she didn't have to pretend to be made of stone. They sat for a long time, the room filled with the ticking clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Silence came and went, not empty but alive, like a shared language. At one point Nora smiled small, involuntary, and Micah returned it with a thoughtful half smile that looked older than him. In that exchange, Nora felt a quiet understanding settle between them. Something had shifted, and it wasn't going back. The next days carried that same subtle change. Micah lingered in rooms instead of disappearing. He hovered near the stove while Nora cooked, asking small questions about ingredients and recipes, or about her day. Not the automatic, how was work, but real interest. He started noticing things. The pile of mail she always left untouched until late at night. The way she rubbed her wrist when she was tired. The way she stared out windows when she thought no one was looking. Nora caught him watching her sometimes with that same steady gaze. Not intense like the first day, but present. It made her feel strange at first, like she was missing some protective layer. Then it started to feel good, like she wasn't alone inside her own life. One evening, weeks later, Nora sat on the front porch wrapped in a thick sweater. The air was crisp, carrying pine and the faint metallic promise of rain. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then fell quiet. She stared at the horizon where the light was thinning, thinking about how much could change without anyone announcing it. She had lived in a bubble of routine for so long, grief and responsibility sealed together, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. Her mind drifted to Evan, not with the sharp pain of the early years, but with a softer ache, like pressing a bruise that had healed but still remembered. She recalled the warmth of his hand, the way he used to call her Nori, when he wanted her to laugh, the plans they'd made in careless, hopeful voices, trips they never took, a porch swing they never bought, a future that ended too soon. A bittersweet longing washed over her, the kind that makes you grateful and sad in the same breath. She sighed, and the sound barely left her throat before she heard footsteps behind her. Micah appeared with 2 mugs of tea, the steam curling upward into the cold air. He sat beside her without asking, close enough to share warmth but not crowding her. He handed her a mug as if this was the most natural thing in the world. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, full of unspoken words. Then Micah said quietly, "I never realized how much you've done, Mom." Nora's throat tightened. It wasn't just about cooking and cleaning and paying bills. It was recognition of years, of the life she'd held together with tired hands. Her eyes stung with tears. She blinked hard, but they came anyway, slipping down her cheeks before she could stop them. Micah didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just stayed there, steady. Nora let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a breath breaking. "I didn't realize you noticed," she admitted. Micah stared out at the darkening trees. "I did. I just didn't know what to do with it. And I think I'm starting to." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of growth. Nora held her tea mug in both hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. In that moment, something inside her eased. The loneliness didn't vanish. But it shifted, it loosened, as if it had been held in place by the belief that no one saw her. Now someone did, and that someone mattered more than anyone. They sipped tea and talked quietly. Nora shared stories from her younger years, some funny, some bittersweet. Micah asked about the town she grew up in, about her first car, about what music she loved, about what she'd wanted before life narrowed her into survival mode. Nora surprised herself by answering honestly, not in a dramatic confession. Just truth, offered gently. Micah listened with patience that astonished her. The boy who used to interrupt with impatient questions about snacks now let her finish her sentences, let her find her way. When she stopped, he didn't rush to fill the silence. He let it sit, as if he respected what it meant. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Nora felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Not the peace of everything being perfect, the peace of connection, the peace of being recognized. Over the following months, their bond continued to evolve. Micah still had teenage moods. He still sighed dramatically sometimes. He still forgot to put his dishes in the sink and left socks in places socks had no business being. But something deeper had changed. He checked in more. He asked about her stress. He offered to help without being asked. Not always, but enough to matter. He made small efforts that felt like love in action. Taking the trash out on a night when Nora looked worn down, bringing her a glass of water when she had a headache, sitting with her for 10 minutes in the kitchen just because. And Nora began to change too. She started noticing herself again. Not just as a machine that kept the household running, but as someone with a past and desires and a future that could still expand. One morning, months after that porch conversation, Nora stood in front of her bedroom mirror adjusting the sleeve of a simple navy dress. It wasn't fancy, but it fit her well. It made her look like someone who belonged in her own body, not someone perpetually rushing. She stared at her reflection and caught herself smiling, an actual smile, not the polite, functional one she'd used for years. She was meeting someone for coffee. Not a blind date exactly, but close enough to make her stomach flutter. His name was Daniel Reyes, a man she'd met through a coworker's friend, kind, thoughtful, unhurried. They'd spoken a few times at small gatherings. He had a calm laugh, the kind that didn't demand attention but offered warmth. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't treat her life like a tragedy. He just seemed interested in who she was. Nora felt nervous and awkward, like she was borrowing a version of herself she hadn't worn in a long time. But she also felt alive. In the kitchen, Micah leaned against the counter, watching her with a small, knowing expression. It wasn't teasing. It wasn't judgment. It was something close to pride. When Nora reached for her coat, Micah said casually, "You look happy." The sentence landed hard in her chest, because it wasn't about the dress. It was about her. Nora's eyes prickled again, tears always closer these days, but softer now, not just grief. Gratitude too. She walked over and ruffled his hair, a habit from his childhood. For a second she wondered if he'd pull away like teenagers do. He didn't. He just gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thanks," she said. Micah shrugged. "Have fun." Nora stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sky pale and clean. The cold stung her cheeks and made her feel awake. The world felt lighter, not because her life had become easy, but because something inside her had opened. At the cafe, the smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around her like a welcome. The windows were fogged slightly from the warmth inside. People murmured softly, cups clinking. Daniel was already there, standing near a small table. When he saw Nora, he smiled and rose, not overly formal, just considerate. "Hi," he said like the word held genuine pleasure. "Hi," Nora replied, surprising herself by how steady her voice was. They sat and talked. At first it was safe territory, work, the weather, funny stories about small-town life. Then slowly the conversation drifted deeper. Daniel asked about Micah, not as a polite checkbox, but as someone who understood that her son was central to her life. Nora told him about raising Micah alone, about the years after Evan, about how grief shapes you. Daniel listened without trying to fix anything. He didn't offer clichés. He didn't rush her past the hard parts. He just listened. And Nora felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: ease. She laughed. She told stories. She noticed how comfortable it felt to be in a conversation where she wasn't performing strength. When they walked outside afterward, the winter sunlight filtered through bare tree branches and made everything look sharp and bright. Nora felt a quiet thrill, not because she knew where this would go, but because she had allowed herself to step into possibility. On the drive home, her mind flickered briefly to Micah. She imagined him doing homework, making a snack, rolling his eyes at something online. She also imagined his reaction when she told him about the coffee. Not embarrassment, not suspicion, probably that same small, thoughtful smile. When she got home, Micah met her at the door. The warmth between them was immediate and effortless, like an invisible thread that had grown stronger with time. No awkwardness, no interrogation, just familiarity and trust. Nora set her coat on the hook, and Micah asked. Nora smiled. "Nice, really nice." Micah nodded like he'd expected that. "Good." They ended up in the kitchen together, sharing a late snack. Nora told him about the cafe, the conversation, the small jokes that had made her laugh. Micah listened with calm curiosity, asking a couple of questions that surprised her with their maturity. Nora realized again how much he'd grown, not just in height, but in depth, in empathy, in the ability to see past himself. Eventually, Micah excused himself to do homework. He walked down the hall with that same deliberate confidence Nora had noticed months ago, and she watched him go with a mixture of pride and ache. Then she lingered in the kitchen alone, staring at the fading light through the window. The room glowed softly, familiar and safe. She thought about everything that had brought her here: Evan's death, the lonely nights, the years of doing what needed to be done, the gradual reconnection with her son. The way one look in the kitchen had cracked open something she didn't know was sealed shut. Not a grand gesture, just a moment of recognition. Nora understood then that some changes arrive quietly, almost imperceptibly. They don't announce themselves. They simply alter the shape of your life from the inside. That first day, when Micah had looked at her with that steady gaze, she had felt exposed and startled. Now she realized it had been a gift. He had seen her, not only as a mother, not only as a provider, but as a full person whose presence mattered. And because of that, she had started to see herself again too. That evening, as the last sunlight slipped away and the house settled into twilight, Micah wandered back into the kitchen to refill his water bottle. He paused in the doorway and looked at Nora. Not intense like the first day, just present. Nora met his eyes and felt something solid in her chest, something that didn't crumble under pressure. She smiled softly. Micah gave a small nod, then said, "Night." "Night," Nora answered. He disappeared down the hall, and Nora stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. She didn't pretend everything was perfect. She knew there would be hard days. She knew Micah would leave home someday. That time would keep moving whether she was ready or not. But she also knew something else now, something steadier than fear. Growing up didn't have to mean losing each other. It could mean finding each other again in a new way. Nora washed her mug and set it in the drying rack. Her hands moved slowly, no longer rushing. She looked around her kitchen, the worn countertops, the familiar window, the pot of soup she'd almost forgotten about, and felt a gentle gratitude settle in her bones. Life had shifted, not because of drama, because of understanding. Because of a son who had learned to look at his mother and see her whole. Because of a mother who had finally allowed herself to be seen. Nora turned off the light and headed toward the hallway, the house quiet and warm around her. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, vast and calm. And for the first time in years, Nora didn't feel like she was simply enduring her life. She felt like she was stepping into it, fully alive, quietly hopeful, and ready at last for whatever came next.